Okay, welcome everyone. We have another Farcaster dev call for you today. And agenda today is going to be a little on the shorter side. I think last week we had a lot of topics and didn't get through a chunk of them. Today we have a few topics. So if we have extra time, we can open it up for general questions if anyone has anything they want to discuss. If you also have topics you want to add, now is a good time to drop them in the chat and I'll keep an eye on them. Okay, we'll launch straight into the first one. So want to give an update on frames. We launched transaction frames about a week ago now. We discussed it in a lot of detail in the last meeting. Launch went pretty well. We've seen over 20,000 transactions, maybe closer to 30,000 transactions happening via the frames. Lots of new frames have launched, which has been cool to see. And the team is now focused on how do we continue to improve frames? Like how can we make the number of unique users using frames on Farcaster go up every day. And we've identified like two buckets of things we want to be focused on. The first is performance. So one of the things that we feel about frames that makes them less fun to engage with is that it feels slow. Like it feels a little clunky, things move a little they're slightly jarring when they change on mobile and on web. And so the first thing we want to do, which Deodad has been working on, is actually improving animation. So this actually makes it feel really, really smooth when you're moving between frames, which even without any actual increase in underlying speed, makes the frames feel a lot faster. And so that's something that's coming to Warpcast soon, ideally today or tomorrow. We're going to roll it out on mobile and web. Second thing that we want to focus on performance is giving devs feedback. So we actually set up a bunch of instrumentation on the client side to start to capture when frames are slow. And so we want to take that and surface it back to devs so that when you plug your frame into the validator or somewhere else, you'll actually get feedback saying, hey, this is how your frame has been performing in production. This is when calls have been slow and whatnot. So it just makes it easier for you to debug why things are slow. The third idea is if we want to materially improve the performance of frames, I think there's a bunch of best practices we can share, which would, let people get smarter and cut down times. But the biggest thing will be actually moving away from having to generate PNGs because a decent chunk of time is spent on actually just outputting that PNG. We have a doc here you can click into and see the different options we're considering. Would love feedback on that if anyone hasn't weighed in already. And there's a few different paths we can take, but one of the big things that we were considering is doing some sort of limited HTML or markup or some surface where you can specify what needs to be shown on the frame, which makes it A, easy to construct, and B, very simple to pass on the very first call. Because if you think about how frames work, it's your app calls the Warpcast backend or whatever Farcaster app's backend. The backend then turns around and calls the frame server. This sends down the data. And then as part of this payload, the client goes and fetches the image in real time. And so it's a lot of back and forth there. And if we can eliminate one step entirely, that will make all frames faster. And we'll also cut down the rendering time, which makes it like another step faster. So that's a third thing that's going to be like a big project. And it's still something that we're not 100% sure of what the right solution is. So it's still very much in the investigation phase. I won't go into all the details here. You can kind of click in and read through all the different options we're considering, why we're leaning towards some versus the others. But if there's any high-level questions on the performance angle, happy to take them now. There's one question in chat, which I'll just answer really quickly, which is, have you considered passing user context on the first frame load? So there's a trade-off. There's a privacy trade-off here, which is I think users don't want their data to be sent out as soon as the frame loads. And I think we want to really adhere to that model and say like, hey, if someone interacts with your frame, then you get all the data you want about their user. But if someone hasn't chosen to interact with the frame, we don't want to be sending out their data before that happens. Cool. Any other questions before I move on to some of the frame features? All right. Features. Horsefax has been working on a lot of stuff here. So I think we shipped connected addresses. So one of the things that happens now when you click on a transaction frame is we will get the connected address. So this is the wallet that you've linked to the frame and send that address with the first transaction call, which you can then use when preparing your call data. So this was a feature that a lot of folks asked for, and it makes it very easy to construct the call data to a specific address. The one call out here is that many wallets will let a user change their address once they're in the next page. So you can't 100% rely on this being accurate, but you can assume that 90% of the time the user is going to execute the transaction with the exact same wallet. And this is actually something we can't even control from the Farcaster UI because it's after they click into the app is when they go and change that. But for the majority of cases, it lets you prepare a bunch of stuff that's better. Second most requested feature has been testnet support. So Horsefax is working on that as well, and I think we'll have that soon. And there's a slightly longer list of features which we've been thinking about, including how can you click on a frame and auth into a website and a whole bunch of other things that are further down the roadmap. But expect the first one's already shipped, which is the connected address piece. Expect the Sepolia one to come soon. Sounds like it's coming right after the call today, and there's more after that. Horsefax or Tony, anything y'all wanted to add on that, on either of those?
No, I don't think so. One other thing I'm looking at is a couple of people have reported issues with MetaMask parsing token approvals. So that's probably next on my list to look at. So if you're doing like an ERC20 approval, it seems some wallets are parsing that. We think that's related to the call data attribution tag that we're appending. So reach out to me if you're seeing that because I'll be looking at that in the next couple of days.
Cool. Before we move on from frames, any last questions? There's a question about resetting mobile address connection. Brock, would you mind elaborating on what you mean by that?
Yeah, so sometimes what we see is, or what a few users have been experiencing is when they go to download Coinbase Wallet, it will connect to that unfunded wallet. Then they will go in and import a wallet with funds, but for some reason it's still keeping that first connection. And so that's just something that's been blocking new users coming onto Coinbase Wallet. I know you guys have got a lot more frames happening on browser, but I just wanted to make sure that that was top of mind. That
cool.
we could at least work that out.
Thanks for flagging that. We'll take a look at that one. And then there's another question further up on frame cache and validation. So I think we expose a couple of different controls here. We probably actually need to write some docs to make this a little clearer for folks. Gox has been doing some work on here. But the high level model is image invalidation. So your frame image, that's actually something that you control directly. And you're able to just easily flip a switch on the max cache age and change that to load immediately or basically make clients refetch it. The frame Chrome itself, that's a little, we actually cache that on the Warpcast backend. We can't scrape every site in real time because that would just be like a crazy number of requests. So we do a fetch and we get it. And then developers can go to the embed tool and trigger like a refresh, which usually, and Goxa, correct me if I'm wrong here, which will usually trigger a invalidation of the frame. And so that's going to be a more manual action where we expect devs to not be changing that constantly. But if you change it a bunch during development and you want to fix it one time, it's like an easy one-way thing that you can do.
Could you provide a link on how to do that specifically?
Yeah, so it's usually the frame validator. Let me see if I can pull this up very quickly. I'll send one up right after this call. Oh, there we go. Someone actually dropped that one. So that's the embed refresh, and then there's the frame validator. Goxa, if you're on the call, do we do cache invalidation when you fetch from either one of them, or does it have to be from a specific tool? Okay, let me follow up and drop some docs on that. I'll actually post an update right after this meeting on what the right way to update to sort of invalidate your caches. But it's going to be manual. It's not something that we want to happen on every frame load because that would not be something that we could handle in a performant way. Cool. There are a few more questions. Let me go through this. From Daniel, what exactly is authentication via frame? So we haven't actually written docs yet, but there's this loose idea we've had that like when you click on a frame and follow a link to an external website, you have everything you need to know that this person that came in was a Farcaster user. So it's almost like you got to sign in with Farcaster. I mean, you don't have a signature from the exact Ethereum ID, but you have, or the Ethereum address, but you do have a signature from the user's account, and you can start treating the user as if they're potentially logged into your page. This is technically possible today, but we wanted to build some infra to make it easy so that as soon as they come in, you can automatically sign them into your app and have them start doing things. So you don't have to click from a frame and then do sign in with Farcaster again and then get them into your app. But it's still a very early idea, so we don't have a spec yet. It's just something we've been kicking around. Cool. Let me parse the questions really quickly. Any timeline to support other wallets other than MWP on mobile? So the blocker for us on supporting, so two stages, protocols and wallets, right? So MWP works today. If someone has a wallet built on MWP, we are very happy to integrate with them. There's probably a little bit of work that we need to do, and we can get your wallet supported. There's a separate path, which is, are we going to support Wallet Connect on mobile? And the answer is we would love to if we can get it to work reliably. And so far, we haven't been able to get it to work reliably. There's like a whole set of issues we run in with, and we've shared it with the Wallet Connect team, and I think they're working on stuff there. But for a set of issues between Wallet Connect and the actual implementations on those wallets, what we've seen in testing is that it fails a bunch of times unpredictably and in different ways on different devices. And it's just a really bad experience right now. And we don't want to push users to something where they're going to try to do a frame transaction and it doesn't work. We'd rather tell them, here's the way you get it set up where it works 100% of the time. And once we feel that a protocol is at that bar, we're happy to integrate it. Conversion percentage on frame transactions relative to Warpcast mobile and web. I don't know if I have that data offhand. Do you mean, David, specifically what percentage of people click the button and then actually successfully execute a transaction?
Yeah, I'm curious how it's performing for people who are trying to drive transactions through Frame.
Yeah, we can probably pull that data. Let me see if I can do that after this call. Going down the list. Cool. Goxo actually responded to the question. Both embeds and frame tools will refresh the caches. So if you just use the link that someone posted up there about the embed, or if you're using our frame validator to build the frames, either of those, when you hit the refresh button, will bust the cache. And so you're going to have to go to one of those pages and bust the cache before you can move forward. There's also a thread going on about potentially like a smaller issue with that, which I'll let people wrap up there. Okay, next thing we want to talk about is hubs. So two things here. First, I want to talk about message deliverability. We built these dashboards to start tracking specifically Warpcast to hub and hub to Warpcast delays. So this is a public dashboard. Anyone can click on this link. I'll actually share it out here if folks are interested. Cool. So what this dashboard shows is two things. One, it shows the amount of time it takes, the amount of time it takes for a message to go from hubs to Warpcast, which you can see for the last 4 hours has been like fairly low in the sub 1 second range for the most part, and a small spike to 7 or 8 seconds. The second shows the opposite, which is how much time does it take the average message to go from Warpcast to hubs. Most of the time, this is like pretty fast. We have noticed in the last day there have been some issues and spikes, like 3 in the morning, there seems to be some job that we're running that's slowing things down a bit, and there's another unexplained spike. So we're going to spend more time cutting this down. But if our plan is to keep the P50 for this like under 5 to 10 seconds, so that casts are always going out and available on all other hubs in the network. So if you ever have any issues and you're wondering, did a cast get broadcast, you can come here and look at it. There's also one-off reports of 1 or 2 casts that didn't make it to the network for several hours. We're looking into this. It seems to be fairly small and self-contained. There's just a couple of issues, and we're investigating that as well. More broadly speaking, Sanjay, Wazimandias, and Aditya are leading a larger project to actually get to 10x scale. And what this means is we want to get to the point where hubs can safely support 500,000 daily active users. At the last spike, we had like close to 50,000 people simultaneously casting on Farcaster each day. We want to make sure that we can survive another 10x. So there's 2 pieces to this. There's a few pieces to this. But the main focus that we're going to do is we're going to start taking like benchmarks of all the core metrics. How effectively are all the hubs on the network in sync? How quickly are messages propagating through gossip? And a bunch of other details. And put that into a dashboard and then really work at getting all of these numbers down. So solutions are going to be different. Some of them are going to be rewriting core CPU or memory intensive parts in Rust. Some of them are going to be like fixing sync algorithms and things at the sync or gossip layer, and there's going to be different stuff. So we think this is a fairly large project, probably like 1 to 2 months in scope. But when we get to the end of it, we will have very reliable message delivery, very high performing hubs, and feel pretty good about, handling the next usage spikes without any downtime. Cool. I'll pause there and see if there's any questions on that. Cool. Nothing else from there, it sounds like, so we will keep rolling. Warpcast updates. So there's 2 Warpcast level features or Warpcast level priorities that we're working on. The first one is feed quality. So stage 1, which shipped sometime last week, which I think most people have been happy with, is affinity-based recommendations. So very simple change. Previously, what we used to do was we would take your feed, we would largely order it chronologically from the people that you follow, apply a couple simple rules like don't show like 4 casts from the same person in a row and things like that, so your feed looks a little more diverse, and give it to you. We now added a new affinity level, which looks at 2 things. It takes the same list, but it has an understanding of which users you interact with often and which casts have high engagement. And if you interact with something often, or it's from a user you follow that has high engagement, we'll bump it a little higher in the chronological order. And if you've seen a cast before, we'll actually bump it a little further down in the order. So you're not seeing the same stale stuff in your feed. That change, I think this has worked pretty well. Very simple heuristics-based change. It's actually gotten people seeing the stuff that they care about on the network. And it solves the core problem of, as you become a Farcaster power user, you typically build up a very large following. And sampling your average following and showing you the casts is not as interesting as sampling the people you interact with the most. Building on that, I think the thing that we want to continue working towards is a more ML-based recommendation system. So we're prototyping some of that stuff out this week, throwing in a bunch of different factors and helping identify like, hey, what's the stuff that people find most interesting in their feed? What's the stuff that people find least interesting, and moving it out of their feed. This is all going to be very personalized to users. So there's a decent understanding of, do you engage with this author a lot? Do you engage with casts of this kind a lot? And so, for example, if you rarely click on frames when they show up in your feed, we'll start deprioritizing frames. And if you click on them often, we'll start showing you more frames and things like that. So that is still in the very, very early stages. The other part of what we're doing is actually a set of UX improvements to just clean up the way the feed looks and feels to make it easier to parse data. We actually should have something shipping in the next couple of days that I'm actually pretty excited about, that Achal and Goksu have been working on. Cool. There's a few questions, so let me go through them quickly. Affinity-based feed only applies to main feed or to channels. So right now, it's only going to apply to the main feed. We want to get it working for the home feed first. We have a separate effort that Dan is driving, read channels and thinking about how channel feeds work. That's not part of this core algorithm for now. The feed quality project is really going to be focused on the home feed.
Yeah, Varun, maybe I can so with channels, I think we're trying to actually create something that we feel good about from a decentralization standpoint, because I actually think any version of the world where channels have a bunch of kind of client-specific signals means channels won't look the same across clients. And I actually think the expectation for a channel host, someone building a community and really kind of thinking about the channel as their space, should have a consistent experience across the network. And so as we think about building whatever the default experience on Warpcast will be, that needs to be compatible with, I think, a reasonable way to decentralize it. So hopefully have an update within the next week there.
Cool. There's another question on any plans to have a feed algorithm marketplace. I think this is a really cool idea long-term and probably something that we will do at some point, but it is actually a fairly complex piece of infrastructure, because feeds have to be generated in 3 seconds flat, very, very quickly, very fast on our infrastructure. And so this is going to look less like, give me your SQL query and I'll run it on my data, and more like, you have to build a really high performance binary that I can run on a narrow set of data in our infrastructure and generate this feed in real time. So I think it would be really cool when we can get to it. I don't think it's in the next 1, 3, or even 6 months, but it is something long-term that I think would be really cool for people to be able to create their own feeds and then either like sell it directly to users to say like, hey, you can rent this algo or use it, or even like Warpcast do some rev share or something like that. That makes it easy for developers to almost like a Kaggle competition, be able to like play for social feed recommendations. Cool. Let's see. Third parties provide a feed index endpoint. That rarely works. Like you can't actually rely on like fetching stuff. At least at the scale that Warpcast is at right now, it's never going to work where you fetch stuff over an API and then reserve it. You actually have to have it generated dynamically on the fly. If the user's scrolling really, really fast, you have to be able to spit out more recommendations. Some of the stuff is actually going to start even changing in real time, whereas the user is interacting with stuff on the feed, you want it to change dynamically. So I think the right way to do this is you have to be able to reduce your model or your feed generation, not into an API, but into an actual binary that the app can feed you signals and say like, hey, here's what we know about the user, and you can spit stuff back out, and this can actually turn into other things. It's also a privacy angle here where like users probably don't want their data like floating across a bunch of different apps. Like if I'm using Warpcast, I don't want my click and view data floating to like 10 different apps on the internet. I want to know that it's, you know, contained within this application.
So one other thing to add there, Varun, because I think David was in the chat got split. He was referring to Blue Sky's model. I think Blue Sky's model is actually more akin to how we're headed towards with channels. Is you can kind of think of it as like a curated feed specifically based on someone's input. I think channels actually will be pretty sophisticated in the sense that we're going the plan is going to be to actually you can have multiple people contributing to that feed in addition to an algorithm that is actually standard across the network. And so I actually think the best way to think about it is channels will be much more akin to what Blue Sky custom feeds are. And I think our point of view from feeds is we're not competing with like RSS or some of these kind of open systems like Mastodon. You're competing against the Instagram home feed, the TikTok home feed, the Twitter For You feed. And that needs to be extremely performant and like best in class from a machine learning standpoint. And so I think, Varun and team are driving that to like, it's going to take us a while, but like get to a place where we feel like it's really good. And then I actually think in learning that, like, how could we actually potentially extend that? But it's always actually going to be driven off of infrastructure because it needs to be super fast.
Yep. Cool. There's some questions about caching in the feed in the chat, which we'll go back to, but any other questions on feed stuff? Okay, touching on caching. So want to explain one more thing about caching for everybody building frames. If you cast something and it has a certain initial frame, that's actually going to be static and going to be in the feed for now. So we don't actually dynamically update it. If you bust the cache and you go put it into the cache invalidator, change it, all casts going forward will have the new feed interaction. The reason for this is we do a lot of caching on our own of like all the old casts and content, and it's actually hard to go back and update all of those retroactively. And so this is going to be more of a, hey, casts going forward will have the new first frame updated, and cast backwards will have the old data. Images, as always, you can update them dynamically. You don't have to do anything manually. You can just set the cache config, and this will be very straightforward to update. Cool. We should get some docs on this out, so we will put something on docs.farcaster.xyz about how all this works, so it's like very clear as you're building a frame how you can go and update this stuff. Cool. Coming back to Warpcast updates, the other thing that the team is focused on this week is DCs. There's a set of like performance and UX improvements that we've heard from everybody that is being prioritized. Dan, I don't know if you want to give a quick overview of that.
Yeah. So high level, we are stepping back and saying, how can we get the performance of the kind of core Warpcast DC surface area today to be more akin to Telegram across a variety of different things? So the first and foremost is like every little interaction you're doing, like how does that feel faster? We actually recently implemented WebSockets. I don't even know if we announced this. So from a like data standpoint, things are actually moving a lot faster. And now where the bottleneck is actually just our implementation in React Native and a bunch of stuff that we're kind of doing in a V1 to like upgrade to V2. And some of that's actually kind of backend stuff, but more than anything else, it's actually like just the small animations. And obviously WhatsApp and Telegram are really sophisticated in terms of just making everything feel fast. So we're trying to hit some level of parity there in that you should be able to use Warpcast DCs and it should feel fast. I think the second big area is in terms of getting feedback from people is just like, I want to be able to do a group, and I go to Telegram because it's really easy and it's really fast to actually get as many people into the group as possible. So I think increasing the kind of ease of use of just actually getting as many people into your group as possible is another big core focus area for us. But the important thing here is similar to kind of how we're doing it with feeds and frames is our view is like we need to hit a level of performance and kind of like the bar for usability before we worry about decentralization, because if we actually are decentralizing something that isn't actually at the performance level yet, it's just going to be a mess, because we're going to be spending time on something that basically people are already not kind of quite using. And I actually want to get to a place where the default is, oh, Telegram not end-to-end encrypted at the kind of like group level. I'd rather create a Warpcast DC than a Telegram DC for X, Y, and Z reasons. And so I think we need to figure that out over the next, 6 months, 9 months, and then get into 2025 where we have a really clear idea of what the actual shape of like what DCs on Farcaster look like, and then actually approach the decentralizing of them.
Cool. Jason, on the replicator issues, if there's stuff that we haven't or we're not actively working on, let us know in the chat, and we're happy to pick it back up. Also, feel free to raise it here, but both are fine. Like if it's relevant to a larger audience, happy to talk about it now.
I see Sarbash just asked a question here. We are facing some consistent issues with it.
Cool. Let me check in with, I don't know if Wazi's on the call and wants to do an update. I'm just clicking through the invitees. I don't know if he's here. So let me maybe handle this offline. TLDR, we're aware, and this is a priority for us. And Wazimandias is actively working on this, and we'll try to get you guys unblocked as quickly as possible. If anyone else, by the way, is having hub replicator issues, it would be useful to know who else is running the hub and running into the same issues. So just let us know either in chat or you can ping me later.
Yeah, it looked like a bunch of others just raised their hand. They're also having issues.
Cool. Okay. Would it be useful to know like what specific issues you guys are running into? I think there's a specific stuck during backfill issue that we're working on with AirStack, which we are aware of. If that is not describe your issue, and if there's other things that are broken, please let us know. Feel free to like just DM me tickets, bugs, whatever you have, and we'll make sure it gets prioritized. Cool. Going through the questions here. Last piece on frames, Next.js to handle stream and get the first response. Cool. I don't have a good answer off the cuff to that, but let me take a look at that GitHub issue and we will get back to you on that specific Next.js issue. There's a report of a DC and inbox channel being bugged. Cool. Thanks for that. I'll send that to Dan and we'll take a look at that as well when right after this call. Sweet. There's another bug report issue from cast channel host. Zara, if you have a link to a cast that's not showing up and you can share it, we can take a look at it. That should not be happening. We haven't heard any other complaints about that yet, but we can take a look at it. Cool. Last question for Dan. Any update on rendering embeds in DCs?
I think we want to hit a level of performance first before we increase the size of the surface area. So like, I think we need to have everything feeling much closer to Telegram before we're adding additional complexity. Because you can imagine frames in DC, like cast rendering is just more stuff that is potentially making it feel slow.
Cool. All right. I think on that note, we will try to wrap here. I think we've touched on all the questions that folks have asked, and takeaway for us is to go prioritize hub replicator issues. And we will get that over the finish line soon. Cool. Thanks everyone for coming today. And if you have questions that we didn't get to, feel free to post them on Warpcast and ping me, or we'll discuss them next time 2 weeks from now.
Bye, guys.